Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am your host Muriel, and in today's video, I will be doing an in-depth review of the novel Half His Age, written by Jeanette McCurdy. My very first review of the year, and I must already warn you that it will be a rather negative one. Yes, that's right. A fully fledged Rant review, well, at least sometimes, love to see it. And that I will also be liberally spoiling the book's plot. Now, before anything else, and for a change, I actually want to start by giving you all a basic outline of the plot of this novel. Half His Age is essentially the story of a very sordid affair between a teenager and her teacher. And yes, I am being very, very specific with my choice of words here, but don't you worry, I'll unpack all of it in due time. It is written in first person and told from the exclusive point of view of the teenage girl, who is a 17-year-old Zoomer named Waldo. Yes, really. Waldo identifies as white trash because she's the child of a working-class single mother with very little self-esteem who got knocked up with her by her high school boyfriend when she was herself 16 years old. Her father is thus out of the picture, and she is also a shopping addict, obsessed with looking fashionable and attractive in a very stereotypically feminine way. The teacher she starts to lust after then becomes infatuated with at the beginning of her senior year of high school, and who then rather quickly starts an affair with her, is one Mr. Korgi. Mr. Korgi. Like the dog. Well, not spelled exactly the same way, but yes, really. The new creative writing teacher in town. Because of fucking course, it's a creative writing teacher or an English teacher. Same difference. Yet again. Mr. Korgi is married and has a young child, and I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be a Gen Xer, given the music and literature he says he's into. Their affair lasts all of the ensuing school year, is peppered with tawdry and at times, I guess, mildly edgy sexual encounters, leads to Mr. Korgi leaving his wife and moving in with Waldo for a few weeks, until it all inevitably falls apart, and Waldo decides to fuck off on a road trip, or something, to escape the pedestrian tediousness of it all. Okay, I'll admit that last part wasn't super clear to me, but by that point, I was also pretty much speed reading through this bitch, so mea culpa. But so yes, it's one of those stories. A story that purports to retell Lolita from the point of view of Lolita, or rather Dolores Hayes, if you care at all about these things, except not at all, but I'll come back to that. A story that purports to show grooming from the perspective of the groomed victim, except not really, but I'll come back to that. And also, why don't we throw in some mild edge for the spicy shits and giggles and lather it all up with TikTok girly aesthetics? Now, before I dive any further into the meat of it, I need to issue a disclaimer and provide important and relevant background context. Also, before anything else, I will be discussing the topics of grooming, child sexual abuse, abuse in general. So if this is at all potentially triggering for you, please prioritize your mental health before anything else and steer clear. But I will be discussing these topics, frankly, openly, so you've been warned. Like I said, this is going to be a Rant review. I'm going to be unflinchingly critical about this novel. I thought it was bad, to be very clear and right out of the gate, and somewhat irresponsible even. And obviously, I'll explain why. But that does not mean I bear any sort of ill will towards its author, Jeanette McCurdy. I got wind of this book through Goodreads originally, and the only thing I knew about the author before reading it is that she'd also written a memoir. I'm glad my mum died, something like that. Simply because I'd also seen it featured on Goodreads. So I've not read said memoir, and to be honest, I have exactly zero desire to do so. And the only thing I've since then learned about the author is that she worked in TV, I think. She was a child actress, something like that. And that's it. Her name meant exactly nothing to me the first time I saw it on Goodreads, and I still basically know nothing about her as an actress, if that's what she was, or any other kind of creative professional. And I obviously know nothing about her as a person. Also, friendly reminder, I'm very pro-death of the author, and more relevantly here, very pro-separating the art from the artist. Which means that whilst I don't think Jennette McCurdy's novel is good at all, in fact, yes, I think it's mildly problematic and I have absolutely no respect whatsoever for it, that does not mean I think she's a bad person for having written it, or that she should be cancelled, or, I don't know, considered pro-child rape, or any nonsense like that. I hope that, at the very least, is crystal clear. And so why did I decide to read this book exactly? Because, to put it bluntly, I am a victim of child sexual abuse. I might use the acronym CSA for expediency later on in the video, just so you're aware of that. Which also includes grooming, very specifically. I've also suffered emotional abuse as an adult as well, while we're at it. And then also because I have now read and reviewed for this very channel a few novels and memoirs that touch upon these related topics. For therapeutic and cathartic purposes, of course, to better understand what was done to me, to better understand the psychology of predators, including my own, all of that, yes, but also to assess, to evaluate the thematic qualities of these topics in various works of literature, standing on their own, but also, crucially, in relation to the OG of sorts of the subgenre. And even then, I maintain it kind of stands apart from said subgenre. Yes. Obviously, I'm talking about Lolita, written by Vladimir Nabokov, which also happens to be one of my favorite novels of all time, across all genres, and which I've now read 3 different times and reviewed twice, technically, again on this very channel. Now, briefly, I maintain that Lolita stands on its own even with regards to this, again, subgenre I keep alluding to, because it's not just a novel about pedophilia. It's doing other things, thematically, artistically, what have you. And also, let's all remember that Humbert doesn't even really groom Dolores Hayes at all, in the clinical sense. He worms his way into the good graces of her mother, said mother dies, sorry, spoilers, and then he fucking kidnaps and entraps Dolores for a couple of years. She never properly falls in love with Humbert. In fact, I'd argue it's pretty clear she's quite aware of the fact he's a freak, a pervert, a fucking criminal deviant. It drives me absolutely up the wall that so many people seem to miss that, or lose sight of that. But then I guess it's mostly coming from people who haven't actually read the book. Okay, whatever. So that's Lolita, and even though I don't think it portrays child sexual abuse with grooming as such, it portrays child sexual abuse just sans grooming. Because of the cultural misinterpretation of Lolita as a story, as a work of art, due in no small part to Mr. Kubrick, then Mr. Lyne's really bad adaptations of it, and undoubtedly all the perps who decided to read Lolita as endorsing the pedo shit, even though it's very fucking clear to non-child rapists that Humbert is the bad guy here, there has been a need for, and the emergence of, what I personally like to call Lolita-Responsive Narratives, or, ready for a mouthful, pedo-hemophilic grooming narratives. Yes, I still fucking stand by that one, sue me. That allow for both the thematic exploration of grooming, CSA, and the trauma that results from that, and a thematic conversation with the nymphette trope, born from the cultural misinterpretation and misrepresentation of Lolita. Among those, I have read and reviewed, technically twice, My Dog Vanessa, written by Kate Elizabeth Russell, which I've then also compared directly to Lolita. I've read again twice and reviewed once Putney, written by Sofka Zinoviev, and I've read and reviewed both Consent, written by Vanessa Springora, and Being Lolita, written by Alison Wood. Those last two are memoirs, but they also fall under, as far as I'm concerned, the Lolita-Responsive Narrative category. Well, there's actually a massive caveat with Being Lolita, specifically, which I didn't like at all, to be clear, and wouldn't actually recommend. in relation to this topic, but if you want more information about why that is, you're more than welcome to watch the relevant reviews. And then in terms of lived experience, the short of it is that I was molested as an 8-year-old by my 13-year-old cousin. This is relevant because oftentimes victimization as a child, or a young child, leads to further victimization down the road as an older child or teenager, or even adult, actually. The fact that I'm neurodivergent is also a huge risk factor. Yes, neurodivergent children are sadly much more likely to be abused and sexually abused than neurotypical children, especially girls, as is always the case with these kinds of statistics. And well, right on cue, I was also then groomed and raped and emotionally abused. I mean, there's always an emotional component to these things in any case. Between the ages of 13 and 20, by a maths and science teacher I met when I attended the school of my city's children's hospital for a year. I was there because of severe suicidal depression and social anxiety, basically because I'm ADHD, but no one had a fucking clue at the time. And I'm sure all of the late diagnosed neurodivergent women in the room can relate there, sadly. So that happened. I was also basically groomed again around the age of 15, online this time. Tick that off your very dark bingo card if you want to, by another much older Frenchman whom I then got in a relationship with, I guess technically in my early 20s. Bit of a grayer situation, that one, I'll admit, though it did involve illegal activity on his part, without a doubt. I won't elaborate. And also, I don't see anything positive about that relationship today and would rather just forget about it, along with all the other bad shit I experienced. Unfortunately, that's not how trauma and memory work, which then also includes being in an emotionally abusive relationship with a very mentally ill alcoholic man, only 21 years my senior this time, that lasted the rest of my 20s. Yeah, my 20s, much like my teen years, weren't particularly good, happy, any of that. So let's just say I'm a bit of a self-made expert on ye olde CPTSD at this point because of, well, all that. Because of the therapy work I've done, and because of all the literature I've simply read on the topic over the past few years. Which is why I specified in the title of my video that this is going to be a victims rant review, because I can't separate all of that from my analysis. It also means I am chiefly concerned with how this story could potentially affect and impact, directly or indirectly, other fellow victims. Or survivors, if you personally prefer that term. I don't, but to each their own. Not that non-victims' opinions don't matter with regards to this novel, or the topic of CSA, etc. in general. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that that is much less important to me, quite honestly. I'm primarily doing this review because the kind of story this novel tells, and the way it tells it, more crucially, in my opinion, feeds into very harmful perceptions of grooming and CSA, into what is essentially an aspect of rape culture, really, and can thus ultimately harm people who, like myself, are viscerally familiar with these types of experiences. Though obviously, victims of CSA, like any other group, are not a monolith. Duh. Some of you will perhaps find this book speaks to your experience in a positive, useful, cathartic, and/or therapeutic way. If that's the case, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, damaged as it is, more fucking power to you. But for me, this ain't it. This really ain't it, guys, and we all deserve infinitely better. And also, before anyone comes at me in the comments, yes, I am vaguely aware of the fact the author may just have pulled from negative experiences she's had herself with older men, an older man, as a young adult, as a minor. I don't actually know, because again, I don't look up authors before I read their books, okay? But let's all be clear that even if she is a victim of abuse, and again, I don't actually know that that's the case, but if it is, that doesn't automatically make her a good fiction writer, capable of thoughtfully and responsibly tackling the topic of child sexual abuse in fiction. Besides, and to reiterate, I always evaluate a work of fiction on its own merits before anything else. And that's that. But so yes, I contend we deserve infinitely better than a BookTokification of grooming. So you might have noticed that in the video's title as well. I'll admit, not my usual formula. I basically never give a specific title to any book review. And I'll also admit it is just a teensy bit clickbaity. Sure, I'll cop to that. But look it, I never do anything clickbaity with my video titles or my thumbnails, so fuck it. I think I'm allowed to for once. Mostly though, it is inspired by an excellent video essay I watched decently recently about the movie Saltburn, which will actually be relevant to this review, titled The Tumblrification of Cinema. It's by the channel Broy Deschanel, if you're interested. I find that what the essayist points to in her video in relation to Saltburn, and then more broadly with regards to contemporary cinema and artistic production as a whole, is very relevant to my experience reading Half His Age. And along with all the other stuff I already mentioned, it most definitely informs the framework I used to analyze this book and write this review. So Tumblrification, BookTokification, what exactly do I mean by this? Well, those terms are meant to encapsulate the capture, the corruption, if you will, of media and then art by a spirit of vacuous, superficial, aesthetics-driven and creatively bankrupt consumption, especially on social media platforms that are chiefly devoted to short-form content. Now, to once again be crystal clear and allow, as always, for wonderful nuance, as I always do my best to, I am, myself, a millennial. In fact, I'm the same age as the author of Half His Age. I'm neurodivergent, and I'll admit, I'm very online. I'm a very online person. I fully acknowledge that. So I'm not some Luddite, anti-internet, or even wholesale anti-social media boomer. Not that I like generational discourse in any case, but whatever. So no, I don't think short-form content, media, art... Yeah, okay, fine. I'm a little more hesitant to use the word art in relation to short-form stuff, but fine. Let's say art. I don't think that is evil, is the devil's work, is all trash, all bad, a sign of the downfall of culture and civilization. No! In fact, I think you can do very neat, creative, or informational things with short-form content. And hey, I fucking use Instagram a lot, personally. It's my largely happy, shiny, humor, art, tattoo, bird-filled little corner of the internet. And I mean, of course, tattoos are art, so there's that. But I do fundamentally believe that short-form content cannot do everything in terms of conveying information, of providing education, of producing art and media. It can't ever really dive that deeply into anything. And the simple fact is some topics and experiences deserve, and I'd argue need, time and depth to be explored, analyzed, pondered, and felt properly. If you only consume short-form content to learn about things, I sincerely believe you are doing yourself a severe disservice, and that's putting it lightly given the state of general education. In terms of education. And if you only consume it to engage with art and media, well, I'd argue you are depriving yourself of greater and better experiences in the long run, and that's a bit of a shame, honestly. If that's all you can interact with for whatever reason, well, then obviously it's better than nothing. Again, duh. It's always better to learn a little than not at all, to experience art and media a little than not at all. Obviously, but like, there's so much more out there for you to enrich yourself with. And then, well, there's the, allow me a little bit of poetic license here, the capitalist demon of consumerist corruption of it all. Yes. Now, it's no secret that capitalism is currently parasitizing all forms of media and art. Short form, long form, it doesn't matter. It's in Hollywood, it is in publishing, it's oh so badly in the video game industry. It's in music too, obviously. You name it, it's there, prancing about with a huge ghoulish grin on its face. But once again, I'd argue it's especially prevalent in spaces that are dedicated to short-form media. Short-form media lends itself especially well to massively oversimplify things, of course, the fiendish dopamine feedback loop, peppered with flashy, tailored ads to keep you glued to your freaking screen. Just like fast and junk food, a lot of short-form media removes essential nutrition, if you will, from its content and crams it instead full of shiny but empty flavor enhancers in the form of often fake-feeling, plasticky aesthetics, cheap, shock-centric emotional reactions, facile slogans, and trendy performative bits of discourse, which often, mind you, originate from good places, with good intent, but get inevitably diluted to sell a product. That is what is meant, or at the very least, what I mean, by the TikTokification of X, the Tumblrification of Y. It's not that everything that comes out of the likes of TikTok or Tumblr or even Twitter is bad. It's that when your approach to media, art, information sharing never goes beyond the scope offered by those kinds of platforms, quality, depth, and meaning ultimately fall by the wayside. It becomes all about style over and without much, if any, substance, all about shock or cheap thrills over genuine, unironic emotional experiences, all about consumption and trendy performative discourse over measured, nuanced, and thoughtful analysis. And if Saltburn is a Tumblrification of the talented Mr. Ripley, I contend that Half His Age is a BookTokification of grooming narratives such as My Dog Vanessa or Pup. Empty superficiality, edgy shock value, plasticky fakeness, trendy consumerism, all of these hallmarks are present throughout Half His Age. Even down to its very writing, where the fast fiction aspect of the book really comes to the fore. It is not a long novel by any means, it's around 270 pages. Guess how many freaking chapters it has, though? I'll give you all a minute. A little over 80. 80 freaking chapters. This book has absolutely no business having this many chapters, this insanely fast of a pace. Because it doesn't have much in the way of meaningful plot, for one thing, sure, and I mean, half of it could have easily been cut, honestly, but also because it means there's never really time to breathe, to sit with the characters' emotions, to properly delve into the complicated and sensitive topics this book aims, on the surface at least, to tackle. There's no room here for genuine introspection on the part of its main character, Waldo. Genuine introspection. I do want to stress that because sure, fine, Waldo does throw out the odd cynical and much too old-sounding remark here and there, and I'll come back to that glaring character work issue shortly, but that's it. There's no real depth here. It's go, 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 consume one chapter after another and another until you're done and left with next to nothing of actual value or substance. Now, one could argue that the fact this first-person present-tense collage of tweet-length chapters makes the novel literally feel like a teenager's diary actually adds to its realism, or I don't know, Waldo's characterization somehow. But again, I'm not reading a freaking memoir here. I'm reading a novel, a work of literature, fiction literature, something that is supposed to deliver character exploration, emotion, theming through storytelling. If I wanted to read a teenager's diary, guess what? I could just reread one of my own, and at least I'd get interesting ideas about religion And all the books I read back then, in the bargain, not an endless naming of beauty product brands I've never even heard of and couldn't give less of a shit about. Speaking of which, yes, there is a lot of brand name dropping in this book, and that seems to have bothered a lot of readers. I actually didn't really mind that, insofar as it made sense for Waldo to care about that stuff. In fact, in terms of character writing, it's about one of the only things that work to flesh out her character, such as it is. She's a shopping addict and incredibly vain, so it makes sense that she'd be familiar with all the hot and trending beauty products and clothing brands. It makes sense, but it also conversely means the story lacks in, let's say, universality and relatability, and that's actually mostly fine in my book. Half His Age is going to age poorly given how bogged down it ultimately is with its many product placements, sure, but it wouldn't automatically be a deal breaker for me if anything else about the book was, good. That being said, yes, I find this aspect significantly more obtrusive here than I ever did in my dog Vanessa, Putney, or even freaking Lolita, which is very obviously set in the 1950s. Unfortunately, this all becomes a lot more tedious because it's much more performative when it becomes more about telling the reader just what a zoomer Waldo is and how representative she is of the, presumably female in this case, zoomer experience. At least that's the vibe I kinda got. And if anything, it's a vibe a lot of other readers picked up on a lot more strongly than I did, judging by some of the reviews I read. Funny thing is, I'm not even sure that reading as such is accurate given, well, again, as I said earlier, the book's author is a millennial. Yeah, I mean, she is literally my exact age. So 33 going on 34. So, yeah, I mean, make of that what you will, as always. And so the book really wants you to understand that Waldo is a zoomer, guys. She's a zoomer. She encapsulates the angst and struggles experienced by zoomers growing up. I mean, every fucking generation experiences angst and struggles in any case. Again, I don't like generational discourse in any case. Although, sure, I think millennials, zoomers, etc. have had it a bit rougher just because of the state of the world. Although previous generations had to go through the World War, so okay, whatever. But so she's a zoomer, guys. She's obsessed with TikTok. She does all her shopping on Amazon and Shine? Is that what it's called? Shine? Yeah. She's a zoomer, guys. Get it? Now, there's an issue with that in terms of character writing and telling instead of showing. Yes, and I'll come back to that very shortly. But there's also a much greater issue with that in terms of just sheer verisimilitude and the world of this story feeling real, or rather, unreal. The structure of Half His Age, its breakneck pacing and pseudo-diary formatting, rob the story of any sort of genuine, grounded temporality. The passage of time, the time taken up by certain events is very, and I mean very poorly illustrated in this book. Events just kind of follow one another, and yes, it's all more or less contained within the span of a school year, but that's about it. This gives a very floaty, unreal feeling to the story. And ironically, that is something you could potentially use to explore, oh, I don't know, dissociation. Full-on DPDR, if you want, resulting from trauma. But that requires actually understanding the topic and, much greater skill, or at the very least experience. As a fiction writer, sorry not sorry. I'm not a huge fan of the way dissociation is portrayed in My Dog Vanessa, but at least it's there, It illustrates a facet of the main character's traumatic response to abuse. Kate Elizabeth Russell properly tried with that, if nothing else. Absolutely not so with this novel, let me tell you. Here, the story just feels unanchored. Speaking of anchors, I'll also quickly note that the story is, at least on paper, set in Anchorage, Alaska. And I've seen many reviewers who either live in Alaska or are familiar enough with it, and Anchorage say the author's descriptions of it don't make a lick of sense, and show a complete lack of knowledge, much less familiarity with the locale. I cannot comment on that personally, since, well, A, I'm European. I'm European. B, I have gone to the States before, but I've never traveled to Alaska specifically. But I found this rather amusing, and more importantly, further proof there is a glaring issue with verisimilitude in this book. And this becomes even more apparent when we consider its character work. This novel is one giant case of wanting to eat your cake and have it too when it comes to Waldo, and her failing to pass the proverbial verisimilitude sniff test. Really, the book as a whole is one giant case of wanting to eat your cake and having it too in terms of broader execution. But one thing at a time. Now, as I see it, there are two big problems with Waldo's characterization, both of which you should also keep in mind when I move on to the book's theming in a little while. Or rather, attempt at theming, because as is most often the case with general fiction, characters are the principal way these kinds of stories explore their themes, if any such are to be found. For starters, there's a big issue with, wouldn't you know, telling and not showing in this book. Several things that are stated about Waldo never actually come alive or are shown to be true in the story. Take the whole Waldo is the Zoomer icon our sad generation needs shtick. And okay, fine, I'm hamming that one up a teensy bit, but I do genuinely think it was present in the novel to a certain extent, and is certainly being interpreted that way to a certain extent by a lot of readers. So again, make of that what you will. That is never actually properly illustrated in the story beyond, the surface level. Waldo mentions TikTok a bunch, for instance, but you don't actually see her using it all that much, or Twitter, or Facebook, or any other social media platform. I don't know, there's Snapchat. I know a lot of people use that. Yes, she talks about makeup a bunch, and watching the odd, 5 quick tips to beautify yourself type videos, or 5-minute exercises you can make to be toned and fit and pretty, stuff like that. But again, she really doesn't do it all that much. And then, what I just said, that's about the extent of it. What's her cred in meme culture? What's her cred in broader pop culture? Where's her freaking Reddit account? Why isn't she posting shit to Instagram? She's not that online, ultimately, for a Zoomer, or even a younger millennial teenager, if you ask me. You're also told she's a shopping addict, and she does buy a lot of clothes, accessories, beauty products on Amazon and Shine and elsewhere. Yes, okay, fine. How the fuck is she paying for all of this? She has a part-time job at a Victoria's Secret, alright, but she's still in school, she's only 17, yet somehow she never has a cash or credit flow problem, apparently. I call bullshit, even knowing what I know about credit card culture in America. But okay, that's more of an issue with verisimilitude. Once again, in terms of telling and not showing, yes, you're told Waldo's a shopping addict and obsessed with appearances, and she does seemingly spend an obscene amount of money on this shit. But that's it? Now, I don't know about you, but in my, albeit limited, experience with brand and male gaze obsessed teenage girls, again, this is not a judgment, it is an observation, a statement of fact, someone like Waldo would want, need even, to flaunt her stuff, to show it off, to shove it in the face of other girls. Because at the end of the day, it's about competing with other girls for male attention, validation, for pretty privilege, if you want to call it that, in order to scrap together crumbs of ultimately fake self-esteem. At the very least, it's a huge factor in the equation, and it's also a facet of, wouldn't you know, patriarchal oppression mediated through the feminine gender, but anyway, a discussion for another day. Where was any of that with Waldo? Why wasn't she, for instance, shown taking a bazillion selfies of herself? Well, selfies are automatically of yourself, you know what I mean. Trying out her new outfits, posting them to TikTok, Instagram, what have you. Yes, she lacks self-esteem, but if anything, I'd argue it's the people who lack self-esteem the most who do this shit, to be clear, in an unhealthy way, an unhealthy fashion, the most, though. You know, I don't have a citation for you there, so take it with a pinch of healthy salt. Waldo also tells the reader that she's very angry a few times, but I didn't see it on the page at all, personally. She does a couple of very unhinged things in the story, I'll get to it, but I don't think that was a sign of anger so much as a very surface level representation of very severe and unfortunately uncontextualized mental illness. Hold that thought. She also shares a lot of what I'm going to call discourse quips about consumerism, filling the empty void inside of herself with stuff, and how shit boys and men are. Again, hold that thought. But a lot of it is just plain contradicted by her actual behavior in the story. I'll concede that could just be an illustration of Waldo's immaturity, or, well, I'd argue hypocrisy, but it also just does kind of veer into telling, not showing territory, so, well, you know, as always, you be the judge of that. And then there's this little nugget, and you'll be happy to know, or not, I don't know, you tell me, that I'm going to be using a lot of textual evidence in this review for a change. Quote, I want to be like them, like people my age, people who have things in common with other people my age. I'm tired of being on the outside looking in, studying, observing, but never just being. Maybe it could be good to try to fit in, to try to be like them, to try to be my age. So Waldo is both a typical Zoomer obsessed with looks, fast fashion, and social media, and an alienated outsider, based on exactly fucking nothing, or extremely little. Yes, she comes from a working class background and suffers from parental neglect. I'll come back to that shortly. But she's not fucking weird in any significant way when it comes to personality or interests. Get the absolute fuck out, you goddamn poser. Now, I'm not going to gatekeep alienation. Lots of different people can and do suffer from alienation for different reasons. That is true, but I am so sick and tired of this fake as fuck appropriation of genuine difference based on absolutely goddamn nothing. I'm neurodivergent. I am autistic with ADHD. I suffer from CPTSD. I was bullied as a child in primary school for being pretty different from all the kids around me. The not like other girls trope is, yes, absolutely cringe as fuck, and on some level, misogynistic too. But if anyone actually does experience not being like other girls, or other boys for that matter, in the case of boys and men, it's people like me, not people like fucking Waldo in this book. Fuck off. And honestly, this book and its main character are not actually worth my little burst of anger there. Sorry about that, but also not really. Because Waldo barely counts as a character, because she barely has a personality. She shops to fill the void in her soul, in vagina apparently, because holy fuck, she be thirstin'. She wants to look fuckable for the lads, and that's about it. The fact there's so little of it is largely due to the fact a lot is said, but not actually shown about it. But then there's also her behavior. And what is actually there? Well, that's the second big problem with Waldo's characterization. It doesn't make a lick of sense, or very little, and screams, I want to eat my cake and have it too, with the story and its supposed commentary. A problem I will further divide into two major points, or facets. The first being that Waldo does not make sense from an age perspective. There are way too many instances of Waldo sounding like a jaded, cynical 30 or even 40-year-old in this book. She throws crumbs of feminist and class, or rather consumerist consciousness at the reader at several points in a way that completely broke my suspension of disbelief. Because it's in a way that just isn't age congruent at all, especially given the fact she also acts like a bratty asshole of a teenager the rest of the time. So at least that works a bit more. In fact, some readers think she sounds too young in places, too immature for a 17-year-old, though that was not an issue for me. No, it's Waldo going the other way that was the problem. The whiplash I experienced reading this book. 1 minute, Waldo is acting like an extremely immature, but she's 17, so fine, I guess, twit, desperate for her teacher's cock. The next, she's expressing a critical understanding of masculinity and the contempt for heterosexual boys and men worthy of... No, fuck that. I'm not going to dignify this trash by invoking a comparison to second-wave radical feminists, because I actually have respect for second-wave radical feminists. Yes, even the angriest and sometimes misguided ones. So let's go instead with a critical understanding and contempt one would simply expect from older and more mature women stretching the legs of their nascent feminist consciousness. Let's put it that way. Quote, "The way men become paralyzed by any whiff of a woman's more disturbing emotions, the way they can't tolerate being needed, or even, sometimes, wanted." And then contrast it with this one. It was a micro moment of trust or raw animal emotion that he was able to edit so quickly, to correct so seamlessly that it scares me. If he's able to manipulate his own emotions so well, what might he be able to do with mine? So I annotated a bunch of these paragraphs in my e-reader. You know, you can do that. You can highlight sentences and add notes and stuff. And so the note I attached to this paragraph I just read out reads, "So wait, now you're wondering about this? Wants to eat her cake and have it too." Because on the one hand, we have Waldo issue fairly succinctly, to her credit, a comment about the way men engage or disengage with women's stronger or negative emotions. And it has some merit, although I'd actually argue that men fear needing women infinitely more than they fear being needed by them, but again, a discussion for another day. But then on the other hand, we have Waldo pulling a big old Pikachu face at the idea there might be emotional manipulation involved in her affair with a fucking 40-year-old. So my question is as follows. Is she a world-weary, uncommonly, being generous here, wise beyond her years teenager, or isn't she? You cannot have it both ways. Now, yes, people can and absolutely do hold contradictory feelings or thoughts about various things within themselves. Especially, in fact, people who have been victimized and are traumatized. I should fucking know. But it doesn't look like that. Not when you're in the thick of it. And again, I should fucking know. Because the other thing is, we're never really given a good reason, or at the very least, a sufficient reason as to why Waldo is this world-weary. Don't get me wrong, a lot of us start developing our feminist consciousness and feminist politics, or our class consciousness, class politics, or hell, our environmental awareness and environmental politics quite young. I myself was about 12 or 13 when I set out on my feminist, environmentalist, and socialist journey. But I've developed, refined, deepened my political thinking and understanding of systems of oppression quite a freaking lot since then. As you'd hope. And I'd also wager people like me are in fact a minority of the population. And I'm all for people thinking and caring about this stuff as early as possible, and for future generations to take a lot of this shit as a given, that would be awesome. But as of now, a lot of people don't get to this level of critical analysis until they're in the, mid to late 20s at the earliest, if they ever get there at all. Really, and I hate to say this, it almost felt at times like the author's voice was coming through the page. Like the author's proverbial hand was showing up to smother her characters and any potential for genuine, organic storytelling and theming. And I hate that because, once again, I don't want to think about the bloody author when I engage with a work of fiction. Anyway, moving on, all of that stuff pretty much goes for Waldo's statements regarding consumerism as well. Her quippy commentary is either skin deep and thus irrelevant, aging congruent and thus a problem in terms of verisimilitude, or blatantly contradicted by Waldo's actual behavior, something which could be justified by the presence of trauma, except you guessed it, it isn't. That brings me to Waldo's thirst, or rather hypersexuality in the clinical sense, and her mental illness, maybe? Let me elaborate. If you're any sort of decent person, you know and understand that given the circumstances laid out in the novel, Waldo is a victim of CSA and, well, conceptually, a victim of grooming. One shouldn't need hand-holding to get that, but the book does its fucking damnedest to convince you otherwise. And one of the ways it does that is by having Waldo behave sexually and romantically, if you can call it that, in a way that doesn't actually make a lick of sense, and makes her look like the heroine of a dark romance at best, or just another pedestrian iteration of the nymphette trope at worst. More than anything else, at the end of the day, Waldo is so goddamn horny in this book, and I couldn't with that shite. I couldn't, because it reaches wildly inappropriate proportions too. Hypersexual and borderline personality disordered proportions that do not read as anything other than sheer, childishly edgy shock value, given the fact none of it is adequately propped up by fundamentally necessary background context or proper thematic exploration of trauma. For starters, her lightning-quick attraction to Mr. Korgi, again, I don't really care all that much, but what a pairing, Waldo and Mr. Korgi. Anyway, so that lightning-quick attraction, it's nothing but that. A lightning flash that comes out of fucking nowhere and makes no sense without further context. Now, okay, fine, I'm demisexual. I do not experience insta-lust ever, but I'm still perfectly aware of the fact it exists and is experienced by most people, at least, once in their lives. But even primary sexual attraction doesn't just come out of freaking nowhere, especially when it involves a teenager, and again, a 40-year-old man she fully, openly describes as being faded, atrophied, ultimately kind of off-putting. In fact, here's the full freaking quote. My attraction to Mr. Korgi is instant. So sudden, it's alarming. So palpable, it's confusing. It's not that he's patently unattractive. He was, clearly once a prizefighter, once. But his looks have faded, atrophied, withered with the gross decay of glaring middle-agedness. And now all that's left are his deep eyes and charming smile, the last remains of a once good face. Glowing recommendation, am I right? How about this one? Quote, his so-called unattractive features that I'm so attracted to. It's excruciating. Intoxicating? Inevitable. This kind of attraction, the kind that already knows I'm gonna be with him, it just doesn't know how. Or this one, quote, was so connected, too connected, painfully connected, like my body already can't stand the moment it ends. The moment our bodies separate and I'm stuck with just mine. But how exactly are they in fact connected? Why is Waldo so fucking desperate to ride this man's cock at first glance? Why? This shit doesn't just come out of nowhere once again, and that goes for pretty much anyone, never mind this kind of pairing. The man who groomed and raped me as a 13-year-old is ugly. Just straight up. You'll have to take my word for it. I would quite honestly share a picture of him, but A, I don't want to risk defamation, and B, I've taken legal action against this man and don't want to do anything to even risk the potential chance of fucking that up, so just trust me, bro, on this one. Now, again, I'm demisexual, so I didn't become attracted to him because of his looks in any case. But even when I wrote about this man and my feelings for him at the time, I always managed to find and say something nice about his appearance. Because that's what infatuation does to your fucking brain. Especially a teenage brain. Doubly so if it results from grooming. Or mind rape, as I like to call it. This bish is not even trying to pretend like there's something genuinely attractive about this loser, but somehow she wants to ride that cock. Sorry, bounce on that dick, keep that in mind. Now, yes, I know that teenage girls can become attracted to their teachers without, to be clear, prior abuse. But A, generally it's a fantasy, and if pressed, I'm pretty sure most of those girls wouldn't actually want to go through with it. B, I'd wager the teachers in those scenarios are, the vast majority of the time, younger men in their, mid-20s? Not middle-aged men, so think someone like fucking Ezra Fitz from Pretty Little Liars. Not again someone like Mr. Korgi or my own fucking rapist. And C, if neither A nor B apply, then the attraction and desire are probably due to underlying psychiatric issues and conditions. Because newsflash, the fact is, despite what patriarchal media, the manosphere, Evo Psychs, and all their jolly lot want you to believe, the vast majority of teenagers don't find older adults their parents' age attractive. This was pointed out to me several times throughout my life by same-aged peers. If anything, I was the weird one in that I never really harbored the kind of instinctive physical revulsion children and teens generally feel towards older folks, because I have parents 2 generations older than me. My mother is a baby boomer, and my father is from the silent generation. I was also, to reiterate, severely bullied as a young child in primary school by other children, and I was molested as an 8-year-old by a teenage boy. That kind of trauma, guess what, can open you up to viewing older folks a little differently than your peers, especially if said older folks also tend to praise you for being smart, curious, and creative, something which I'm sure will resonate with many a former gifted child, doubly so if you're also neurodivergent like me. All of that could provide a trauma-informed reason as to why a teenage girl like Waldo would become attracted to a middle-aged man like Mr. Korgi. But no, no. There's none of that in half his age, you silly beans. And the same applies to Waldo's extremely inappropriate hypersexuality. Time for more quotes. So there it is, my truth, the truth about how I got here to where I am today, a 40-year-old man teaching creative writing to high school seniors at East High in Anchorage, Alaska. The truth about why I am a failure. My vagina pulses. It's not about him being a failure. I don't know whose vagina would pulse at that. You know what, Waldo? Same. I don't know whose vagina would pulse at that, personally. So that's when she sees Mr. Korgi for the very first time, and it just gets worse. Quote, after class, I run down the hall, weaving in and out of the crowd of students. I shove open the bathroom door and duck into a stall. I lock the door with my elbow and pull up Mr. Korgi's Instagram. Okay, Instagram mentioned there, I'll give it that. With one hand, while the other hand slips up my skirt and under the waistband of my thong. So we have, well, not quite indecent exposure there, I don't think, but close enough. Quote, and then I feel him grow. Now I know. Undeniably, he wants me. Or at least his body does. Maybe his mind feels guilty about it, tangled up in morals and society and everything else. But his body wants me, and mine wants his. And bodies don't overthink and worry and analyze and doubt. Bodies just do. See how it's all written in a way that gives her the initiative? The doomed, transgressive, borderline star-crossed lover's shtick is, yes, something my rapist said to me as a teenager, but here it's coming from Waldo. The only one shown really trying to hit the brakes on this shit at any point in the story is Mr. Korgi, not Waldo. Now, this is in fact something a lot of predators will do as well, and that includes mine. I mean, that's all part of the mind rape and the pretense that caring is like, oh, I'm too old for you, you'll be happier with someone your age. Like, they will do that, yes, but they will also whip out the kind of bullshit the author chose here to assign to fucking Waldo. Please let me. No, he repeats, more sternly this time. He breaks away and touches his mouth, stunned. I grab his hand and put his finger in my mouth and suck on it while I look into his beautiful blue eyes, into his sad, sad soul. So, there's no good way to say this, folks. Waldo assaults Mr. Korgi in this bitch too. Yeah, that happens. How do you even unpack this shit? Yes, victims can, sadly, unfortunately, go on to victimize others. The friendly reminder that the vast majority of us, the vast majority of victims of child sexual abuse and sexual abuse in general do not, in fact, go on to become perpetrators themselves, especially if they are female, just because of the way statistics work with sexual violence. And obviously, Waldo assaulting Mr. Korgi does not invalidate or justify the abuse she herself experiences, though again, if only in theory. It never does. In fact, it doesn't matter to me if you're the most evil person alive. If I learn you were raped as a child, I will feel deep compassion and sorrow for the child you once were. Nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies sexual violence, especially sexual violence against children. If you disagree with this in the slightest, the door is right there. Please get the fuck out of my personal space. Thank you. So what the fuck am I actually supposed to make of this scene exactly? If this is an attempt at showing there's no such thing as a perfect victim, which is true, it failed miserably. Because again, I'm left asking why? Quote, when I'm done, I straighten out the comforter and put back the bottle, my wetness still gleaming on it. So Waldo rubs one out in the school bathroom, check. Assaults Mr. Korgi, check. And this is Waldo breaking and entering into Mr. Korgi's home, taking out his bottle of cologne, and masturbating on it, as you do apparently, before leaving out the very window she climbed through. Brava! What the fuck is wrong with this girl? No, but really, like, not only is she unhinged levels of horny to the point where it gave me fucking Fourth Wing flashbacks, she's hypersexual to the point of criminal behavior. And all I could internally scream to myself was, why is she like this? Where is her goddamn trauma? Because yes, hypersexuality is very often a symptom of trauma, of PTSD and CPTSD tied to sexual abuse. I experienced a little bit of it myself growing up. I did things sexually, or at least like erotically, let's say, as a teenager, that were dangerous and very bad for my self-esteem and self-respect. It is a form of self-harm, really. But I never did anything that even comes close to Waldo's level of bullshit. That just goes way beyond what I'd expect from CPTSD alone. But if Waldo was shown to actually genuinely suffer from PTSD, that would at least provide a fucking modicum of an explanation. But we don't get any of that in this trash fire of a novel. When I have to scramble this freaking hard to come up with an extra textual explanation for a character's severe level of fucked in the headness, your book has fucking failed the assignment. Now, there is one tiny little thing that could help to explain why Waldo is the way she is, but it is not developed or explored nearly enough in the text, and also I simply just don't think it's enough on its own in any case. But so, Waldo has a very absent, neglectful, and not super mentally healthy herself parent. Yes, she also has an absent father, but can we please stop reducing everything to fucking daddy issues, especially with women's psychosexual stuff? Besides, it's not like she's actually shown to be looking for a father figure in Mr. Korgi, and additionally, plenty of us have loving fathers, yet we're still raped as children anyway, so just fuck off with that. No. But so Waldo's mum, she was knocked up as a teenager and dumped by her boyfriend. She is undereducated and cycles through boyfriends that don't actually value her in any real sense, like nobody's business. She even identifies as a love addict at one point in the book. I don't think that's actually a real thing, clinically speaking, but the idea is that you're hooked on the high of infatuation, or limerence probably in this case, and are not able to experience self-esteem, self-love, any other healthier way. As a result, she's not as present as she should be in Waldo's life, and Waldo is essentially what is termed a parentified child. Which isn't good. It's not good at all. It can absolutely be a traumatizing experience, but it's not really explored, or even illustrated all that well in half his age. It's all, again, rather skin deep, and then I don't think what's on the page is enough to justify Waldo's all over the place, wanting to eat your cake and have it to attitude towards life and relationships, or then her borderline deviant sexuality. So yes, neglect can be a form of abuse, but I never got the sense Waldo's mother didn't love her, or that she genuinely mistreated her as such. Again, to be crystal clear, neglect is bad. It is bad. Parentifying your child is, say it after me, bad. Waldo's mother is not a good parent. But it's not enough. You can't just reduce Waldo being this much of a nonsensically crazy, horny asshole, and the complexity of child sexual abuse and grooming, especially when the victim is an older child, because sorry, not sorry, grooming an older child is de facto going to be harder to do for a predator, and that is not at all shown in the book either. You can't reduce all of that to, it's the mother's fault. No! It should be part of the equation, yes, but not its sum total. Fuck it. I could do the same thing. I could reduce all of the bad things that were done to me down to, it's just because I'm autistic. But I can't, because it's not. Conversely, I can easily identify at least 5 different factors that went into making me especially vulnerable to sexual predation. And I'm sure the same basically applies to most, if not all, but most victims of grooming and child sexual abuse. The background context needed to prop up and justify Waldo's incredibly and borderline offensive characterization is simply not there. And then she's also a bitch. Waldo is a cynical, contemptuous, vain, massively unlikable, and to me, massively unrelatable asshole. As you all know, I'm not a character-driven reader. I'm an ideas-driven reader. I don't need to like or relate to characters, and I very rarely do, to enjoy a story or find value in it. So Waldo being an asshole is kind of whatever to me, and it certainly, once again, wouldn't change the fact she is a victim of grooming and CSA, well, again, in theory. But on top of everything else that was just so fucked about her characterization, it just kind of added salt to the wound. Because it was also just insanely distracting. Let me repeat, this book tries very goddamn hard to make you forget this is technically the story of a teacher grooming and sexually abusing a child. And no, Waldo's unreliable narration is not an excuse, because I do not have this problem with Lolita, which, let's all remember, is written from the point of view of the predator. Waldo is also judgmental as fuck, and she's kind of a bitch to her best friend, or only real friend, I guess? Again, you be the judge of that. Franny, because Franny's a Mormon, you see. And that apparently means she only befriended Waldo out of Christian, pity-infused charity, which... that's a take, I guess. Waldo is convinced that actually, deep down, Franny finds her kinda gross, basically, because she's poor white trash, but, there's no real evidence of that I could see. And also, if this is a case of unreliable narration, then you have to be consistent with it, and I'm going to go ahead and argue that Waldo is just full of shit, and projecting her own self-esteem issues hard here. Also, even if Franny originally befriended her out of a desire to be a good Christian, is that so terrible at the end of the day? Like, is it so bad to want to be a good person because that's part of your religious values? Can we maybe tone down the cynicism and contempt towards good, kind people who also happen to be religious a little bit here? Also, may I add, Franny is the only character in this goddamn book who gives a shit about the fact Waldo is being abused and calls it out for what it is. The only one. As far as I can tell, the only one here settling for the other because there's nothing better available in terms of friends is fucking Waldo, not Franny. Waldo's characterization is, by and large, trash. We established that. Her mother's was alright, but obviously lacked depth and definition, because that's the name of the game here. Her friend Franny's was done dirty, and I stand by that. So what about Mr. Korgi's? Mr. Korgi was overall better characterized than Waldo. He had, at the very least, slightly more of a personality, but there are also problems with his characterization when it comes to the fact that this is, again, technically supposed to be a story about grooming, except not really. To maintain the pattern here, I basically have two big issues with Mr. Korgi. The first, and by far biggest, is that Mr. Korgi doesn't really read like a predator, a child predator at the very least. And I'm being very precise with my words here, yet again. He is absolutely, without the shadow of a doubt, a pathetic and moderately emotionally abusive asshole. Yes. But there is a difference between being an abusive asshole and a sexual or pedocriminal predator. There is certainly huge overlap between the two populations, mind you, but they are also fundamentally distinct categories. Mr. Korgi, to me, is most definitely the former, but I don't think the book does a good enough job illustrating the fact he is supposed to be the latter as well. He's just not cunning enough, or more specifically, just manipulative enough quite for a sexual predator, to my mind. Especially, once again, one going after an older child, veering slowly into young adulthood. There's something way too wimpy, too fangirless about him, too pathetic for me to believe he's that much of a danger to minors. And don't get me wrong, sexual predators can absolutely be deeply pathetic individuals, on some level at least. They're not even necessarily all that intelligent as such either, but to be able to manipulate and groom someone to the point of infatuation, to be able to rob someone of parts of their mind and soul, that's how I put it, even if they're a child, even if they're especially vulnerable for whatever reason to predation, you do need a base level of low, calculating cunning and certainly intentionality. And I just didn't really see any of that with Mr. Korgi. Well, not enough of it. He is incredibly self-centered, self-pitying, and certainly engages in a bit of good old Darvo, too, sure, but where's the cunning? Where's the anger, too, actually? In my experience, once again, and based on what I've read, predators have a tendency to get really angry and mean when they feel like they're losing control of the situation. And it's not like Mr. Korgi stays entirely chill throughout his affair with Waldo. He doesn't, but most of the time, he's just more of a sniveling, pitiful wretch than anything else. In essence, he reminded me infinitely more of my emotionally abusive alcoholic ex than he did of my rapist. Quote, "It's a masterfully chosen phrase, a way of pinning the problem back onto me, like he's just the timid guy trying to make sense of his girlfriend's outburst, which he quantifies as any emotion that makes him remotely uncomfortable, which is any emotion that isn't happiness or horniness." Putting aside the fact this remark, made by Waldo, suffers yet again from being pretty age incongruent, it illustrates the fact Mr. Korgi can essentially be read as a pretty box-standard, mild to moderately abusive asshole, but not necessarily a predator as such. That being said, none of this comes close to being as bad as the train wreck of Waldo's characterization. I'll concede there can ultimately be variations in the general psychological profile of predators. Again, I'm pretty knowledgeable about this stuff, but I'm not an actual expert, so again, exercise critical thinking here. So fine, and on its own, Korgi's characterization wouldn't be enough to sink this wretched ship of a novel, but it definitely plays a part. Especially considering the other issue I had with Mr. Korgi as a supposedly predatory character, which is the fact he actually does leave his wife, with whom he has a young child, to be with Waldo. My immediate reaction to that one was horse shit. In what universe does that actually happen? In what universe does it make sense for a supposed predator like Mr. Korgi to sacrifice a source of social status, social protection, comfort, and stability for the benefit of his victim? Again, I'm not saying it is literally impossible for something like that to happen, but by and large, that's not how predators operate, psychologically speaking. Power and control absolutely fucking matter to them. Putting their interests first is unarguably a priority for them. Like, hello? If nothing else, having a wife can often protect predators if and when shit hits the fan. Yes, I hate to break it to you if you didn't already know this, but a not insignificant number of women in those situations, or I guess, male spouses in the case of homosexual abuse, I don't know. A lot of them in those situations will act as staunch defenders of patriarchy and rape culture by blaming victims and defending their husbands. My rapist wife, whom he married while I was still actively being victimized by him on top of everything else, threatened me back in the day. Yeah, she just straight up threatened me and absolutely 1,000,000,000,000% blamed me for the seduction of her husband in the witness statement she gave the police. So no, I don't buy that someone like Mr. Korgi would actually follow through on his promise to leave his spouse to be with his victim. Fuck nah. Again, not impossible, but extremely unlikely. And to reiterate, whilst it didn't entirely break verisimilitude like Waldo's whole deal did, it certainly helped to strain it. Also, and before I move on to the theming section, a very quick note about Mr. Korgi's wife and, straining or breaking verisimilitude with this quote. "A cool, wet spot grows in my underwear. I catch a hint of a sweat bead under the brim of his baseball hat. Is he nervous? Or just hot under the bright store lights? I told my wife about you," he says, "about how I have a student this year who's really good. Very promising. She said maybe we should have you over for dinner." And they do, at their house. So, question for all my American viewers, is this shit believable to you all? Like, is this considered normal in the States? Do teachers there just out of the blue invite new students they barely know over to their house for fucking dinner? Like, what are we doing here? In what universe, yet again, does this actually make any kind of goddamn sense? In what universe does this not violate any sense of verisimilitude?
So, as it turns out, this video got so chunky, I decided to split it in two for greater viewer comfort. So this is just the end of part 1 of my deep dive review and analysis of Half His Age, and you can look forward to me discussing and dissecting the book's theming and edginess on its own and in relation to other works of fiction in part 2. So hopefully, see you there!